Good morning, everybody. The webinar will begin very shortly. We'll just take a few moments to let everybody join the call. Okay, so good morning, everybody, and welcome to our webinar this morning, which is all about what the government's procurement reforms mean. It's part of Global Government Forum's How Whitehall Works series. I'm Siobhan Benita. I'm a former UK civil servant, and I'm delighted to be chairing our webinar this morning on behalf of Global Government Forum. In terms of that topic today, so the government has announced the development of a new national procurement policy statement, but that's not the only changes in the procurement space. So today we're going to be covering what is in that new national procurement policy statement, but we'll also talk about the Procurement Act and look at how those two things interact with each other. We'll be covering also how public bodies are interpreting these new approaches, looking at how procurement can be done differently in the context of the Labour government's mission-led approach. And then towards the end of the webinar, we'll give you a bit of an overview of Global Government Forum itself. And I know on the call today, we've got potentially both kind of government officials, but also maybe suppliers to government. So we'll be looking at how you can engage with Global Government Forum, whether you're an official or a supplier, and the various channels that we have where you can engage with us. We have two great experts with us here today who will be available to answer any questions that you have. And in a moment, I'll do a quick introduction to them. But just to stress, we do want this to be a conversation, a discussion today. So although we'll be giving out a lot of information, we want to allow as much time as possible to answer any questions or any concerns or any comments that you have. So somewhere on the device you are using, you should see a Q&A function, a Q&A button. At any time from now, please use that Q&A button to message in your questions or your comments. And we won't wait right till the end of the webinar. If I see the questions coming in, we'll take those questions and comments throughout the conversation as we get going. So please do use that Q&A as much as possible. But in terms of the two experts that we have with us here today, we've got Rick Anstis, who is an international authority on procurement contracts and contract management. And after some years working in the retail sector, Rick held several senior appointments within the UK government before then joining academia and spending 10 years as senior lecturer in procurement and director of procurement programmes for the UK's National School of Government. Rick then started his own business as a procurement consultant and has undertaken training and development for some of the world's most successful companies, including British Airways, Ford, GLR, but many others. And he's also continued to work with the UK and government organisations around the world. So great to have you with us here today, Rick. And as you'll see, we've got a Rick and a Richard. So we will be using Rick and Richard so as to avoid any confusion as we go forward today. And then who may be familiar to some of you who have done our other kind of How Whitehall Works webinars, we've got Richard Johnston, who is the executive editor of Global Government Forum, where Richard helps to produce the editorial analysis and insight for our audience of public servants around the world. And before joining GGF, Richard spent 5 years at a UK-based title, Civil Service World, and latterly where he was acting director there, and he's worked in public policy journalism throughout his career. So that's our two great experts. As I say, please do use that Q&A function at any time to message in your questions or your comments, and I'll keep coming back to those. But let's kick off then. So, Richard, we did say in the description of this website, webinar on the website, that we would be covering in particular the kind of new policy statement. So, I'm going to come to you with the first question. Can you just give us a sense of what that national procurement policy statement is, what it covers, how it relates to the missions, etc.?
Yes, indeed. And hello, everyone. Good morning. Thank you very much for joining. Um, so before we get into the kind of national procurement policy statement itself, just a little bit of the background that's kind of exemplified by that slide there, that following the UK general election, Labour came into government with quite a large majority and with a focus on delivering the 5 national missions, which are on that slide as they were in the Labour Party manifesto. Some of the exact phrasing has been tweaked in government, but those are still the major aims that government is focusing on: kickstarting economic growth, making Britain a clean energy superpower, taking back streets by halving serious violent crime, breaking down barriers to opportunity, and building an NHS fit for the future. So these missions were set as the government's priorities, and delivering them requires, according to Keir Starmer as Prime Minister, a different approach to government, requires departments working together rather than in traditional silos, as well as working with businesses across the economy and with trade unions uh, to build greater partnerships and uh, partnerships in different parts of the public sector between national and local government. So what the National Procurement Policy Framework, which was published on the 13th of February, an early Valentine's Day gift for people who work in this sector, um, is kind of the way that they are looking to influence all the money, all the spending that is made in the public sector to kind of drive that spending towards the missions. I'll touch on how it does that in a second, but just to say as well, these statements are quite long-standing ways for different administrations to set out national strategic priorities for public procurement, and how they are going to use that public spending through procurement to drive different priorities. There's always the overarching priority of delivering value for money for the taxpayer. That kind of remains unchanged at the kind of peak of the pyramid, but these policy statements kind of reflect sometimes different priorities, whether that's a specific encouragement to a wide range of suppliers, to promoting social value, and to now supporting the missions. So the policy statement that was published just last month sets out a kind of framing for mission-driven government, which means raising our sights as a nation, focusing on ambitious, measurable, long-term objectives that provide a driving sense of purpose for the country. And indeed, the work where they have developed the missions in government, what the government's calling its plan for change, there is measurable objectives that it's looking to reach by the end of the Parliament. So that is the kind of overarching guidance that I think they will be applying to the procurement policies. And that new way of government that people are the government has been talking about around the missions is focused on, or it includes public procurement, includes public procurement as a lever for doing things differently, and the guidance sets out that public procurement is a way to source goods and services in a way that delivers value for money, including social and economic value across the commercial lifestyle, and that drives sustainable economic growth and benefits local communities. And for each of the missions, it breaks that down. So for each mission in the policy statement, there are a couple of points under each that the government now expects the public bodies following this procurement statement to help drive the missions. So under kickstarting economic growth, for example, procurement activity will support that by creating opportunities for small businesses and social enterprises across the country, by supporting high quality jobs that offer fair wages and good working conditions, and encouraging innovation and the development of new technologies in line with the government's industrial strategy, which is also under development. In the clean energy superpower mission, the procurement policy will support that through accelerating the move to net zero, in particular, promoting green technologies. The procurement guidance says that contractors need to take account of the environmental risks and ensure suppliers are committed to high environmental standards and protecting natural habitats and biodiversity. On the kind of Take Back the Streets mission, the reducing crime one, the procurement policy says that it will be supported through ensuring that procurement encourages community cohesion and raises awareness of actions they can take, as well as encouraging suppliers to recruit from groups that currently struggle to access employment opportunities. That, of course, also flows across to the breaking down barriers opportunity mission, where some of those barriers are kind of enunciated as well, removing barriers to entry for young people and underrepresented groups into the labour market, including people with protected characteristics and care leavers. It also says that the procurement authorities should look to address specific skill gaps and facilitate access to training when they are undertaking procurement exercises as well. And lastly, they build a National Health Service fit for the future mission will be supported through the statement by contracting authorities, providing high quality jobs that help promote good physical and mental health, and reiterating the aim, again, it comes up quite a lot in this statement, of encouraging suppliers to recruit from economically inactive or less active cohorts.
Thanks so much, Richard. I mean, it's interesting. I think people have been used to procurement being used to drive forward certain government priorities already. So we had in there previously objectives around net zero, around equality, for example. So maybe when we come on to some of the Q&A, it'll be interesting people's thoughts on how different this is going to be. And I know in the next section, I'm going to be asking you, in reality, what difference is this going to make? But thanks for setting out kind of some of those specific mission related issues that the government will now be looking for. Just to Marvin, no, we weren't showing anything on the screen during that section. You will be seeing some slides coming up in a moment, though, because now, actually, before we go on to the next section, Rick, we have had a question come in, which I'll take straight away. So Rajesh has asked, given the change globally in the landscape regarding climate initiative and diversity, is it still realistic to continue to focus on clean energy and net zero targets? I'm going to put that to you, Richard. I'll come back to you on that one. But I mean, my assumption is yes, absolutely. I don't think the UK has specifically changed any of its ambition on net zero, has it? So, Richard, your thoughts
No,
on?
and it has in fact increased its ambition at the most recent UN climate event last November. Keir Starmer quickened the pace of the UK's um, uh, kind of milestones towards net zero. So yeah, that remains a UK government priority.
Yeah.
The question is right that the global politics, and in particular in the US, that there's a lot of kind of changing rhetoric, and that will probably lead to changing policy in time. But in the UK, the commitment to net zero and sustainability remains strong.
Thanks, Richard. And Rick, similarly, Philip Beach has asked a very similar question. So we've seen examples recently where environmental and social value commitments appear to be softened, especially Trump administration BP slashing investment in renewable energy, refocusing on fossil fuels. Do you think the UK government is likely to reshape or reposition its objectives in the climate area?
No, well, I think I'd say three things. One is the message from Rome absolutely endorses what Richard has just said this week. The UK's commitment, and indeed the many countries of the world's commitment, remains strong and stronger. A target is by definition a target, so you don't necessarily move the target because it's got more difficult to hit because there's some fog come down or there's some wind blowing across it. The target is still the target. And I share the concern, and I suspect it's a concern that's underpinning those questions, that the politically driven attempt to publicly bin and bonfire things like DEI clauses in contracts is yet another example of procurement being hijacked for political gain. And it is not impossible to imagine a rightward shift in UK politics wanting to make a similarly very public demonstration of its new approach to government, going through and taking out, for example, all the social value clauses in the way that DOGE in the US is pretending to be doing at the moment. And I think the fact that that threat exists shouldn't shift us, including those clauses, in compliance with both the law and public policy at the moment. But the questioners are right to think, and perhaps in the back of the mind, if nowhere else, that in the way that all policy can change, the policies that they are implementing through their procurement decisions may change and force them to change those decisions at some point in the future. But anyone in procurement is used to that. It has always been used as the implementation arm of policies that are not of themselves necessarily about commerciality or about spending less money.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. Okay, so we're going to move on. What I was going to ask you next, Rick, then is, so I did mention Richard has covered there the new policy statement, but we also have a new Procurement Act, I believe. So could you give us a bit of a sense of what the new Act is, when it came in, its history, bring us right up to date in terms of the Act?
Thanks, Siobhan, and yeah, thanks for inviting me along. Yes, absolutely. So this Act has been a long, long time in gestation. If you could flick me on to the next slide, please, Raquel. Thank you very much. The ideas floated in it, of course, were a post-Brexit reaction to procurement, because UK procurement previously, since 1975, had been regulated largely by the European Union procurement directives, which were largely written by the UK delegation, who themselves were ex-HM Treasury people. So the procurement directive that the EU still uses reads very much like something from the Treasury in the 1970s. The idea of full and open competition, of purchasing by tendering, of having transparent processes and legal certainty makes sense wherever in the world you're doing it. And the global position is that the World Trade Organization and the global procurement directives and acts will encompass just that. So although there was a post-Brexit rethink of what does UK procurement look like, there were very few suggestions of changing those fundamental approaches. But the Green Paper, as you can see on screen, came out in 2020. And here we are a lot of years later. There was a lot of responses. It was one of the most responded to Green Papers ever. And those responses covered the whole spectrum of, we should regulate much more and align much more and simplify much more and focus purely on spend and value and cash aspects, to the very opposite of, we should essentially deregulate public procurement beyond a few basic principles and really open it up. And there was a large political part to this, because, of course, being able to say this is the liberation of the UK from the shackles of the EU directives and those kind of rhetorical things were very much attached to it early on. What we're now hearing is a very different approach. So the incoming government in July 24 was faced with what essentially had been the previous government's work, and it was a lot of work, and Cabinet Office friends of mine have worked for years on this very hard. And the legislation came through in October 23. The new government came in, then was followed by the previous government's public national procurement policy statement in May of 24. Then, of course, the new government came in July of 24 and was left with that, well, what do we do with this piece of legislation, which wasn't really ours? So if you can, next slide me, please, you can see that what was going to be the 28th of October 24 on the original Conservative government timeframe inevitably got postponed a bit. Ironically, it went from one half-term holiday to the next half-term holiday, which made every parent's job that much more difficult in this world. But the new procurement policy statement, which Richard has outlined so brilliantly there, and the legislative date for it now coming into effect, 24th of February. So we are right topical in terms of it coming in. It's a huge shift. We were talking about 128 pages of the Act and another 108 pages of regulation. So it's physically, the sheer physical amount of wordage is enormous. It's really significant. But sat below that are, as I suggested earlier, not that many fundamental changes in approach. And ironically, for something that was billed as a simplification, it's actually introduced quite a lot more process for procurement people in government, both central and local, to have to do. And it has potentially complicated slightly the bidding process because of things, as Richard's been saying, that have been brought in as part of the other drivers like social value, which bidders will now have to think about and work out how to include in their bids and in their tenders. But if we could, I'll just show you very quickly the shift in scope. So if you could next slide me, please. Historically, until now, essentially, until last week, and this still applies to any procurements that have begun in any sense already, and begin can be very loose. It can be, we have committed to make this purchasing decision would count as begun. And those decisions and all current contracts will have been let under one of these 7 procedures. But some in that list are very rarely used by the UK and indeed by other member states. They were very, very rarely used. And some of them had an element of overlap and duplication to them as well in terms of what the procedures involved. But it's not always fully understood, I don't think. This is the law. This is not a pick and mix from these processes. You commit to one and you follow it to the letter. And if you realize halfway through you're not following it, well, you might as well abandon it and start again. Because if you haven't complied with it to the letter, you can expect challenge, and you have not complied with the law. This is no more optional than complying with a speed limit. So those 7 identifiable separate procedures as part of this new act have now been reduced dramatically in number to just 3. And if you could again, next slide me, please. The top one of which, the open procedure, remains to all intents and purposes the same as it ever was, albeit with slightly reduced timeframes for minimum response times. So the open procedure, which was still greatly used in other EU member states and still is, has never been that greatly used in the UK. We've always seen it as a bit of a high risk. You might have hundreds of responses when you only were expecting 10 kind of procedure, but it's still there. And government is keen on it because it sounds open, it is simple, it is straightforward. And if you can cope with lots and lots of bids, well, why not do it that way? The last one there, number 3, is essentially a renamed negotiated procedure without prior publication, which was very rarely used. So essentially so rare that most people on this call won't have encountered it. And what we're then left with is the one in the middle, number 2, which is going to become the new normal and will become the one that people will expect to use. If you're a bidder, it's the one you expect to be bidding under. If you're a buyer, it's the one you expect to be using on behalf of your organisation. So if I pause there, we'll come back shortly. We'll look at some of the big changes that are going to stem perhaps from that, insofar as we can foresee them, because of course to some extent we are being asked today to guess what is going to happen, because we're literally in the first week.
Thanks. And in a minute, I'm going to ask both of you kind of in practice, what difference is this going to make in practice, having these 2 new things in place? But we've got a couple of questions already coming in. And you mentioned there, Rick, kind of social value stuff. So Verity Fletcher has said, what provision is there under the Procurement Act for SMEs regarding social value? As a small company, we don't have the financial or workforce resource to deliver as much social value as larger organisations. So how do procuring organisations take this into account when evaluating bids? And similarly, Richard, I might ask you, you can both answer both of these, but a very similar question, although on a slightly different issue. So Lisa Brooks has said, as a Midlands-based software supplier, the ability to recruit from groups highlighted is not always possible due to skills required in our sector and clearance levels. This disadvantages organisations like ourselves who are not able to recruit from that particular talent pool. And there are already third sector organisations which work within these parameters to support people into employment and upskill. So this is almost an unfair task. So I guess both of those questions are around, if you can't tick all of these boxes, you know, or some of the various boxes, you feel like you're disadvantaged. So Rick, I'll come to you first, then Richard. How do you think Verity and Lisa should be approaching this?
Yeah, thanks, Siobhan. Yeah, great questions. Thanks for them. As a micro business, I completely empathize with this. It is very difficult. The size of job that a smaller company is likely to be after is unlikely to have the mandatory requirements for those social value criteria, in which case you can be as flexible or as creative as you wish. There's nothing on requiring buyers to quantify social value in any particular way. And that's both a blessing and a curse of social value, of course. But there will be buyers trying to take difficult decisions about, would I rather go for a smaller charitable organization on my doorstep, or a larger organization in the next region that's running a really terrific apprenticeship training program, or that gives its staff 2 volunteer days each a year. So that's all I could do for that, is to say, yes, those are very good questions. This is not a new issue for procurement people. The fact it's been enacted hasn't shifted it in terms of the mindset of the buying decision. And those buying decisions have never been easy. Talk to your procurement people in the organizations that you would hope to be selling to, find out what they value, find out what criteria from that broad umbrella that is social value are the ones that they are most interested in. Is it about localism? Is it about employment? Is it about environment? And remember also that social value criteria needs to be connected to the subject matter of the job. So if you're talking about a consultancy connected with, let's say, local archaeology for a local authority, then employment, environment will be quite significant. Whereas perhaps something around broader pollution aspects, much less likely to connect to that. So focus in on what your organization's good at, identify what social value it genuinely can generate, and then talk to your potential customers about whether that is also what they're after.
Thanks. Richard, did you have anything to add there, maybe for Lisa as well?
Yeah, I mean, I would just yes, reiterate everything that Rick said, and the point on digital skills is that yeah, or the procuring organizations will kind of decide that the relative weighting that they put on these things. And we all know that digital skills are at a premium in government, and that is often why government looks to the market to get these skills in. So I would imagine for kind of digital procurement, things focused on those kind of skills, that the emphasis on reaching hard to reach groups in the labour market and things like that might not be one of the key criteria that the organisation chooses. It would be much more on the ensuring the value for money as a kind of consequence of getting in the skills that government needs. But yeah, I mean, Rick is absolutely right. You know, speak to the procuring authorities themselves, and they'll be able to set out how they're prioritising this. Because again, the policy statement applies across the piece, doesn't it? It applies to every organisation. So these are objectives that will be reached in the aggregate.
Yeah. Lisa is coming back with a bit of a challenge, saying that the issue that they've found is you can't talk to procurement people in the public sector. You can only answer the questions that they ask. So you can't really put your case. Rick, have you got any advice on that?
I spend quite a lot of time at Meet the Buyer events organised by particularly local government. I think local government, by definition, is more interested in local markets, local suppliers. And I hope those are as widespread as they feel to me. I mean, I'm probably involved in half a dozen a year in different councils. And those are the procurement people. This isn't the social services people or the library service people. They also have their own get-togethers and discussions, of course, and conferences now seem to have been picking up again. We have blue light conferences going on in Birmingham monthly. So I know that procurement people halfway through a tendering exercise and busily trying to chase up the last few bids and do the evaluation will not entertain that conversation, both because they won't have the time and because they won't want to be seen to be potentially talking to one bidder and not to others. But at any other point in the process, I would hope they would be receptive to that. And if they're not having Meet the Buyer type events, well, ask them to, because the council next door will be having those events, and they don't want to be the one who doesn't then get the best suppliers, because it's the suppliers who've been to the Meet the Buyer events who know what's expected of them.
Okay. Thanks. We've got lots of questions coming in. I do want to move on in a moment to ask both of you, what do these things mean in practice? But there are a couple, I think, that are particularly coming back on things that we've just covered. So Philip, again, has asked, you know, the three areas that you covered, Rick. Philip has said, how do the procurement conditions for the 3 procurement types shown align to those which might exist in other existing procurement channels, like the digital marketplace, and established frameworks, for example? How do those all fit together in this new world?
Great question. They fit together as much as the buying organisation now might choose to use those kind of approaches, because the whole point about this flexible procedure, number 2 on our list earlier, is just that. It is flexible. The buying organisation can design a procurement process within the expectations and parameters of securing best value. It must be demonstrably competitive, it must be demonstrably open, but they can then design it to suit themselves. Now, whether they really will do that, especially from week 1, I rather doubt. I suspect they will use what they know. I suspect they will use procedures they know. And I would suspect they will use some draft ideas templates that Cabinet Office have produced to at least provide the impetus for this process of designing a process. And all of those look very like pre-existing processes. G-Cloud itself and the other digital frameworks aren't going to change. They're closed at the moment to new entrants. They're due, they'll be reopening, depending which category you're looking at. There's a published timetable for when those are going to reopen to new bids. But of course, they will reopen in the new structure, not in their existing structure. And although frameworks and dynamic markets will still exist, DPSs will still exist, they have been renamed dynamic marketplaces, and they can be up to 8 years long under the new process, which may or may not be a good thing depending on your perspective and whether you're on that list. And even if they are 8 years long, they have to be reopened at least within 5 years. But that's still quite a long wait to get onto that framework. So two things to that. One is I think more buyers will use frameworks, even more buyers will use even more frameworks than we have seen, and it's been a growing number over the last few years anyway. But there's a kind of cautionary principle of, well, let's just use the framework because we don't need to create anything. And the other is that frameworks will themselves change and evolve to meet this new regulatory environment. So if you're on one already, stick with it, that's good.
Yeah.
If you're not on one already, talk to the other framework factories, the ESPOs and the YPOs and so on, and see when their frameworks are coming up next for reopening and what they're thinking of doing about creating new versions under the new regulation.
Right. So Oliver had asked, how will this affect frameworks where pre-qualification has been required to permit bidding on tenders? And then Lee asked kind of the opposite of that, I think, which is, does the Act allow suppliers to access existing frameworks which they were previously not approved within?
Right, the last one is no. That's the straight answer. First one, it will depend on how they redesign it. But although things like duration have changed and there's a few new notices they have to publish about contract award, the basic structure of a framework, although it's been renamed a dynamic marketplace, remains the same.
Thanks. And Richard, I just want to come back to you on that issue of the kind of digital marketplace, because I was going to ask you about that later maybe, but as it's come up under Peter's question, because I know a lot of the partners that we work with in Global Government Forum are in the kind of digital data tech space. So is there anything you wanted to add in terms of kind of might this impact on things like the digital marketplace, in addition to what Rick has said?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a specific point on the digital marketplace, the sort of framework, but it's a point kind of broadly on government digital procurement. We know the government digital service, which has been moved and kind of re-empowered, for want of a better phrase, and in the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology has recently set out a lot of digital transformations that it's going to focus on, both for civil servants and for citizens. And the citizen ones include the launch of a gov.uk app that allows people to store their some identity documents, including a driving license, in a gov.uk wallet that over time will expand to include different entitlements. When I was at the launch of that event, there was a conversation, for example, about how the government was, the extent to which the government was looking to allow that wallet to be incorporated with things like Apple Wallet and Google Pay wallets and things like that for kind of users' convenience. And the official speaking at that said that they were kind of engaging with, or would beginning the engagement with the private sector around that. So that's just one example where I know the government is looking to do a lot of this digital transformation stuff, and this procurement framework will kind of impact that work going forward. Obviously, with the caveat that Rick said that ongoing procurements will be under the same process, but it's just worth bearing in mind that there seems to be a lot of action in digital procurement in government. And this will obviously impact on that.
Great, thanks, Richard. So we did pause you a bit, Rick, in your slides. So I want to go back now, picking up. Let's go back to some of the slides that you have, and I think we were moving on to, which we've already started, I think, to answer in some of these questions that are coming in. How do you think public bodies are interpreting these new approaches? So what difference will it actually mean day to day?
Thanks. Yeah, great question. And I'll caveat it again, just to say, of course, that this is a mixture of my guesses of, what would I be doing if I were a CPO in a local authority, and what others are telling me who are in those jobs in terms of what they're thinking about at the moment. So yeah, if I could have the next slide up, please. The big changes are the extent to which the regulation now requires, so the law now requires buyers to engage with the market before they launch any procurement, and to be completely transparent, and indeed to publish their planned future spend, the so-called pipeline. And that is a big change. Forward-looking organisations have been doing it. The MOD has made it its policy of doing it for many years, because MOD is particularly dependent on innovation and big projects and big engineering and so on. Others less so, but now the law requires it, and it's a public notice that you have to issue that will say these are the things we're planning to buy. This is the area of spend. This is when, and that really will be a big change. And anyone on this call who is a supplier or a potential supplier to government, that is a big difference. That means organisations which, as you've been telling, the questions suggest, and I think it's true, some public sector buyers have not been easily approachable, but this is a big shift. This will now be visible and published. The new competitive flexible procedure that we've spoken of, that's brand new. We've never had a procedure before that said these are the areas you must address and these are the principles you must apply, but how you do the procurement in terms of actual process is up to you, and that's a big shift. It's been said that the entire procurement cycle is now regulated, and that's quite I think, significant shift. You will now have to, for example, publish your key performance indicators, your KPIs, and to an extent publish how your suppliers have behaved and performed against those KPIs. So we've gone beyond procurement, if you like, if you think of procurement as being the tendering and choosing and selecting bit of the process. And we're now saying that procurement encompasses that contract management, delivery management, and that also has notices to be published. I've just realized I put in competitive flexible procurement twice. That's yeah, it's the same one. And another big shift though is public sector buyers have been used to the EU jargon of meet the most economically advantageous tender. The economic has come out. So the new Act introduces most advantageous tender, which allows perhaps a rethinking even of at the make or buy level. Should we be doing this ourselves internally, in-house, rather than outsourcing it at all and contracting for it at all? Should we think about doing it by direct grant to a charity? Should we think about not tendering it at all? And if we are going to tender it, what's the most advantageous solution to us? Not necessarily in purely economic terms. Now, this goes right back to some of the questions we've got online and some of the potential issues for the court. And I think perhaps potentially for some of the things that will make buyers a bit anxious, because advantageous is not as measurable as economically advantageous. If you tell me to do something economically advantageous, I can give you a spreadsheet and sort on the smallest number. If we just go with advantageous, that doesn't rule out economics, but it clearly allows an inclusion of lots of things and potentially allows us to exclude economic at all. The central digital platform, much lauded, and the delays in implementing that were part of the reason for postponing from October last year to February this year for the go live date, is now up and running, at least partially. For those who aren't already on it, I would strongly suggest you do go and register. It's inevitably a little bit of a security palaver to get onto it, but it's called, if you're not on it already, the Find a Tender service. If you Google that, you'll find it. You may be on the old version. You will have to recreate your access under the new version, which started on the 24th of Feb. And it allows you to then upload company information, financial information, sort of the sort of information you would have included in a pre-qualification questionnaire if you were responding. And that sits there and is logged for you. It also allows you to see all the opportunities that have been advertised on it. So it brings suppliers and potential work together in one place, which is long overdue. And I really hope it gets adopted and absorbed and encouraged and enthusiastically used. If you're based in Scotland, it's Public Contracts Scotland. If you're based in Wales, it's Sell to Wales. If you're based in Northern Ireland, it's e-sourcing NI and e-tenders NI. But for the UK-wide significant size, what jobs, that's over 130,000 or thereabouts, and for all smaller jobs within England, over 10K, then those will be there on the Find a Tender service. Could I have a next slide, please?
Right, Rick, can I just stop you
Yeah.
there? 'Cause very quickly, Rajesh has said, great that you said the pipelines will be published under the new app, but he said, where will that be, do you know? Because there's hundreds of portals and
yes, how true. It will be on the portal for that particular local or that particular government department or local authority. So yeah, sorry, there is not one central portal yet where all these things are scraped together and put into one place.
Okay.
But you will know who you want to do business with, and you can go to them. You can also think about joining either one of the commercial organisations that will provide that spotting service for you, and or your own local or national chamber of commerce or trade body, some of whom provide that service as well, of pulling information into one easily accessed place where you can spot opportunities sifted to your area of expertise.
Thanks. And I know you mentioned, sorry, I keep stopping you in your tracks, but you talked about how this should be more transparent in general. Overall, there's a lot more emphasis. So Peter Briggs had asked, can public sector organisations reject freedom of information requests about current basic contract details because they on the grounds of it being vexatious, or that
Yes.
you know, or does the need for transparency to stimulate opportunities for suppliers, including SMEs, override this view? So is there anything happening here that would make it easier for SMEs to get access to information?
Not within an FOI environment, no, but in terms of the commercial notices that have to be published by the organisation, by the buying organisation, potentially yes. You can see on screen now these many new notices that buying organisations will have to publish, many of which will be of great interest to SMEs, I think. The pipeline notice is an obvious example of that we've been asked about online already. The preliminary market engagement notice, so this is a market we're thinking we're going to need to get engaged with. That's a very useful thing to know. The planned procurement notice is very like the old PIN, if you've been in this space a long time, the pre-indicative notice that the EU directives required. And then the transparency notice means just that. Here we are saying this is what we're going to be doing. If it's a dynamic marketplace you're setting up, which is the new name for DPSs, again, that has to be published. The award notice is the same as it ever was. This is who's won the job. The contract details notice is more detailed than we currently produce. The below threshold tender notice is more detailed than the current ones. And then that whole right-hand column on the end is all new. So this is all post-contract award. Any change to a contract, performance monitoring, KPIs, and any termination of a contract is all out there. But as far as FOI goes, legitimate reasons for rejecting a freedom of information request around contract award and so on, of which there are many, it's the single most common area asked about. Commercial in confidence is still there. Defence of the realm in confidence is still there. Vexatious inquiries is still there. Cost of collecting the information is still there. So the Procurement Act and FOI Act don't speak to each other directly, but clearly a lot of FOI requests are about procurement decisions.
Thanks. And similarly, Rafiq has said, understanding key issues beyond what's documented in public sector contracts requires proactive engagement and strategic exploration. How can this be achieved? So maybe some of these new notices would help in that respect, would they?
If it's true to say that the longer notice you get of an intended decision, the better your strategy and the better your opportunity to exploit or understand that strategy, then yes, absolutely. You will know earlier and in more detail the spending plans of the government organisations in the UK at all levels, even at parish council level. Yeah. So yeah, if that's what's being asked, then yeah, absolutely.
Thanks. Sorry, Richard, you can continue. There's so many questions coming in. It's great. Thanks to the audience. Please do keep these questions coming in. It's fantastic.
So those notices are a big change. If I could have the next slide up, please. Big headlines just last week about the idea of being able to exclude bidders who have demonstrably failed to deliver to public sector customers previously. Oddly, that was announced in the press as if it was new. It's not new. We've had similar clauses for decades, and indeed the EU Procurement Directive under Section 29A allows you to exclude bidders who haven't kept their taxes up to date, for example. But as many on the call will have seen, Angela Rayner made this big announcement as part of the Grenfell report coverage and government response to Grenfell report that Arconic, Saint-Gobain, Exover, Hartley Facades, Kingspan Insulation, Ryden Maintenance, and Studio E Architects will all be investigated by this new body, the Procurement Review Unit Debarment Review Service, which is the DRS of the PRU, which is right into the world of three-letter acronyms. Interestingly, of course, the publicity attached to it is itself massively sensitive and significant. The moment you are identified as a company that is going to be investigated by this unit, clearly everyone is going to be in, there's a danger everyone thinks, oh, well, no smoke without fire, and that's your reputation damaged, even if you are subsequently cleared entirely. But this is a very high profile, very public use of this new unit and its new powers of investigation. One of the responses way back 5 years ago to the Green Paper suggested that maybe rather than contractual disputes always going to court, maybe we should have a tribunal, a kind of contracts or procurement tribunal, a bit like an employment rights tribunal, to take them out of the mainstream of legislation, of court decisions, judicial decisions, and into a more specialist arena with perhaps a swifter and more discreet resolution. It hasn't happened. There is no procurement tribunal, but this has been created, this unit. And clearly, it's going to gain a lot of publicity off the back of Grenfell, and clearly, the public generally would expect, hope that contractors who had acted fraudulently, corruptly, hopelessly, incompetently, in a polluting way or in a socially damaging way would not be rewarded with further government business. And as I say, that provision has always been there. It's just the profile. But more significantly, perhaps for people on the call immediately, if you feel that your organization has been unfairly treated in a procurement process, if you think you should have been participating and you were not allowed or invited, or you were sifted out for reasons that you're not convinced are real, or indeed you become aware of a contract award that you aren't aware of it being tendered and being made available to you at all, this is the same place you would go to challenge that. So it's part of Cabinet Office, but it holds responsibility for the whole of the procurement landscape across the UK. So any issues, questions, challenges to a procurement process, they will take up the cudgels on your behalf, which is, again, a significant change.
Thanks. Just conscious of the time, we're going to have to run because we've got lots of questions, but you've got more. I think there's a couple more issues, aren't there, in terms of what's different on the ground?
Yeah, just two more things which we've touched on lightly already. So I'll just quickly canter through those. So next slide, please, if you would. So this is that issue of the most advantageous tender, which also reflects a lot of the questions I'm seeing today. So how far can value be separate from the subject matter of the contract? Is value some sort of absolute, or is it value in the eyes of Betchworth Parish Council or Swindon Unitary Authority? So can we all have different ideas of what is value to us? And if it is more about a wide perspective, Could, for example, a local authority that has declared itself a nuclear-free zone then say, well, that is our single most important value, because that's human life and security. So, if you don't comply with that, sorry, we don't care who you are, we won't use you. So those are the MAT issues, if you like.
And that links to a question that's coming from Colin, who said, the application of environmental social value criteria is likely to be inconsistent and a postcode lottery.
Yep.
This can be difficult, time-consuming and expensive for mid-caps as well as SMEs. How should businesses navigate the inconsistencies? And is what you're saying, understand how it's being applied locally or where you're looking to tender? Is that what you're...
Yes, it's exactly what I'm saying. And it's absolutely right back to that sort of green paper discussion 5 years ago about, is procurement a sort of global definite process that you simply apply cash-based everywhere? Or at the other end, is it a localism issue where different towns, different villages, different countries have entirely different preferences, needs, cultures, amounts of money to spend, definitions of value? And yeah, as a supplier, I can absolutely echo the complexity that brings about, but you can identify that as the cost of localism almost. It's I'm afraid.
Yeah. Thanks. Back to you, Rick.
And yeah, the last one from me, if you could just pop the last slide up, please, is this issue of the frameworks. I've touched on it. There are now going to be two types of framework. The closed framework essentially is the same as current frameworks, with including the 4-year duration limits. The new is the open framework, where we can have this 8-year duration. Reopening points will be defined at the beginning of the framework, and can't be longer than 5 years. And the existing suppliers have to jump back and rebid. You don't get an automatic pre-existing right to stay on it just because you're on it, which is a bit radical. If there's a cap on how many suppliers there can be on that framework list at any one time. But as many on here will know, a lot of the frameworks don't actually have such a cap. There's no limit on how many can participate as long as they meet the base criteria.
Brilliant, thanks. And so, Rick, just to be crystal clear for Anthony, who asked, did you say that any process that had been started can utilise the older procurement paths, or if a process is already in pre-market engagement, do they need to follow one of the 3 new processes?
Good question. If they've already begun, they must stick with the one they began under, or formally restart under one of the new ones. I don't think anyone is going to formally restart under a new one if they've already begun under an existing one, and having committed to whatever their existing procedure they're on now, that's the one they will have to stick with. And pre-market engagement would count as this procurement has begun. So if you're already being asked about one under a particular procedure, it will continue under that procedure.
Thanks, Rick.
The Cabinet Office has published its own pipeline, has made public its own pipeline of planned spends, which it regards as having already begun. So there's about 27 procurements being run by CCS at the moment under existing, last week's procedures, and they have also now published their pipeline for their new procedures, if you see what I mean. So the 2 will be running in tandem for a long time yet, because of course the procurement can take a year, even 2 years perhaps, and will be running under the previous process.
Thanks. Just in 1 second, Richard, I'm going to come back to you on kind of the statement and what changes that might mean for procurement in the context of mission-led delivery. But final question that's come in for you, Rick, in this section from Nakash is, how does the Procurement Act impact on non-mainland UK territories?
If by that you mean the Cayman Islands and so on, yeah, it's completely binding on them also. Yeah, the overseas territories will follow it. Yeah.
Thanks. So, Richard, we've spoken a lot about the Act and what that means in practice, some of the differences, but how do you see procurement being done differently then for mission-led delivery in light of the statement?
Yeah, I'm not going to repeat a lot of the things that that Rick has said. It's been fascinating for me to hear as well. But just the point about kind of the speed at which the kind of policy statement will be applied across public authorities in the UK is will depend on the different processes that they are running. But I think given the centrality of missions to central government, you can expect to see central government departments adopting the kind of mission framework for their procurements at pace. And the other thing I wanted to add, and it touched just to expand a little bit on what Rick was saying around the build or buy decision. The government has said in the policy statement that it will update the sourcing playbook, so the guide on one of the guides that public sector organisations use, to introduce a new public interest test, for contracting authorities to assess at the outset of a procurement process whether the work should be outsourced or if it can be done more effectively and drive better value for money in-house. So that could be an area where we see public authorities taking advantage of that tweak in the sourcing playbook to make that decision about possibly undertaking activities in-house. And that, I think, could be quite an interesting development, because we've seen some kind of local authorities in different parts of the countries moving to more kind of an insourcing approach over the years, but it's always been slightly butting heads at times with the guidance that they were working to, the national procurement guidance that they were working to. So if that makes it easier for public authorities to insource things, then I think that might be an opportunity that some of them look to take. That's definitely something that I am going to be keeping an eye on, because I'm very interested in the extent that would be applied.
Thank you so much, Richard. Just to say, if you've got any questions now generally about anything that we've covered, please do send them in. Rick, it's really great to have you and Richard here, but you've got such a depth of knowledge on this. So if you're on the call, any questions that you've got about procurement, now is your chance to ask them. But because we have this mix of people, I think, in the audience here in terms of civil servants, public servants, and potential suppliers, we were also going to pause a moment just to give you a sense of kind of Global Government Forum and some of the channels that we have where you might be able to engage with us, and we'll pick out some of the, in particular, some of the procurement related elements as we go through that might be of interest to you. So next slide, Raquel, just to say, we, Global Government Forum, if you're not familiar with us already, we are here, if you're a supplier in particular, to help amplify your organisation's reach and to help you foster meaningful connections with public servants globally, regionally or nationally. Next slide, please. And we will be sending you these slides. So we'll send you all of this after, so you'll have all of this. And I think Peter asked whether there would be a recording of today's conversation, because we've covered so much ground. Yes, there will be a recording. We'll send you a link for this so you can watch this all again and share it with your colleagues as well. So I'm not going to go through this in too much detail, because I want to make sure we've got time if there are any final questions coming in. But just to say, Global Government Forum, GGF, we have lots of different channels and engagements, whether you're a public servant or a civil servant and you want to come to some of our events or listen to our webinars and podcasts, or whether you're a supplier, potentially would like to sponsor some of it. There are a whole host of things there. You can see we do everything from conferences, in real life events, through to these types of webinars. We publish research, we publish thought pieces, we do podcasts. There's a whole host of ways in which you can engage with us and get involved with us. Next slide, please, Raquel. We are unique in terms of we have this real global network of civil servants and public servants around the world, which I think is rarely found in other organisations. You can see for yourself there, we're highly trusted, we are impartial at all times, so and very authoritative. So we have really great events all around the world. And I'm going to move on to some of those in a moment. Raquel, if you can go on to the next slide. So as you will see there, we really are global in the Global Government Forum. We run events and we have networks, and we have an online presence as well as an in-life presence in all of these areas that you can see across Europe, North America, Latin America, Asia, and Middle East. So we really do cover the rest of the world, and we get global audiences on a lot of the events that we do. Next slide, please. Again, I'm going to send you all of this, but you will see the types of public sector audience that we have. We have very senior people coming to a lot of our events, lots of senior civil servants, managers and senior managers on there. And we have a really broad mix across professions. So a lot of digital data and tech people, because there's a lot of focus on digital transformation, but actually across all of the professions now, because people are realizing how much digital transformation, for example, is a part of what they do, regardless of the profession that they sit in. So we have a lot of policy advisors, comms, finance, all of the professions really are covered by the work that we do. If you could move on to the next slide, please. Just to give you a sense now in particular of some of the forthcoming events you might be interested in either coming to if you're a civil servant or a public servant, or being involved in as a potential sponsor, or coming to as well if you are a potential supplier. So the next big one coming up is our kind of flagship UK event. So it's called Innovation. It's been running for many years now. We have over kind of 2,000 or 3,000 civil servants coming to this over 2 days in London. This year it takes place on the 25th and the 26th of March there. You see a list of great people that are already signed up to speak there. There is potential still for sponsors to get involved. Richard, I think there is a procurement session as well here at Innovation, isn't there, that we wanted to flag?
Yes, indeed, and it's particularly looking at that kind of build versus buy decision that I mentioned that public authorities are going to be kind of putting at the forefront of a procurement decision, bringing together people from different governments around the world to share best practice on how you make that decision, what factors you take in to account. So I mean, I think it'll be a very topical conversation based on what we've discussed today.
Thanks, Richard. Next slide, please, Raquel. And I see we've got a couple more questions, so I'm going to rush through just this little bit. We're doing a big event. We did our inaugural event in Washington last year. We're repeating that again this year. It'll be on the 13th and 14th of May. Obviously, lots of changes going on in Washington at the moment, so it'll be a really interesting event. But if you are interested in doing anything in America, in Washington, please do get in touch with us. Again, we'll send you all this information, and there will be contact details for you on the slides that we send out. Next slide, Raquel. And then just to mention one more kind of event, we're doing Public Service Data AI. This will be the third year we're running a Public Service Data event, 16th of October. Again, that is based in London. So if you're interested in anything in that space, please do get in touch with us for more information. And then I think we're just going to talk a tiny bit about training. These are all the webinars. So in addition to these types of webinars, you can see there we cover webinars on a whole host of issues that civil servants and public servants have told us are most important for them at the moment. So everything from kind of deploying AI, building trust in AI, to tackling cyber threats, to boosting efficiency. So digital credentials, all those kind of issues we cover. And if you are interested in putting on a webinar, if you have an idea for a topic of a webinar, again, please do get in touch with us. Next slide, please, Raquel. And then just some training. We run training. Maybe you weren't aware that Global Government Forum has its own training program as well. Lots of different issues, as you can see there, everything from regulation to project management and leadership. But I did want to flag, we're going to send you this, because if you wanted even more information than you've had today on procurement, just to say that GGF do run a training seminar delivered by Rick here. I'm sure you'll agree, Rick has been fantastic. Rick actually delivers one of our training courses, which is all about understanding UK procurement and procurement legislation. So if you wanted to go into a deeper dive on some of the issues that we have covered here today, we have just sent out to you a link for that training course. Thank you, Raquel. I think we are coming to the end of the what we cover in GGL. If you go on to your next slide. Yep, so there's the information. As I say, there's the contact details, but don't worry about screenshotting that or anything. We will send you all of that information after this event. Thank you. So now we've got a couple of minutes left, I think, and we've got a couple more questions come in. So Ian Hall, hi Ian, good to see you on the call here. So Ian has said, the Sunday Times reported about 2 months ago that some public sector contracts allow suppliers to automatically pass on legislative increases in labour costs. The context was NI increases. Is this widespread? Interested in Rick's views?
No, it's not, but it's not uncommon. And we heard a lot of it. Well, every time the minimum wage goes up, we hear a lot of suggestion that that should almost be an automatic allocation to that supplier. But of course, many employees are on more than the minimum wage, so those two things don't necessarily go hand in hand. And the whole idea of whether you would rather have a fixed and firm price and know exactly what you're going to be spending for the next 3 years, or whether you would rather have an adjustment clause that allows price to go up or down reflecting cost, really depends on what's most important to the buying organization and what amount of risk sellers are willing to take. So as so often in procurement, what we're really talking about is where's the risk going to sit? Is it risk with suppliers or is it risk with buyers? But no, it's not that common to have indeed, I would say uncommon to have an automatic allowance clause that says if NI goes up, your price goes up and we will pay that.
Right. Thanks, Rick.
Good
And
question.
then Rajesh, actually, it's taken a while. I had assumed at the beginning that this might come up earlier, AI. So the whole world, as the whole world dives into AI, Rajesh has said, we're looking for opportunities to pilot or find problems to solve. So this isn't a normal procurement approach. Do you have any suggestions or thoughts on a way to find a sponsor, no costs on their side? I think more broadly as well, Richard and Rick, I want to ask both of you, how do you think AI, just AI in general, is going to change the world of procurement, both in terms of kind of how government runs procurement, but what they're expecting of suppliers as well? Rick, do you want to go first? And then Richard, I'll come to you for your thoughts.
Let me do a quick procurement answer, because I think actually the impacts are much bigger elsewhere. We're already we're seeing tech assistance with things like evaluation. We've got automatic sifting. We've got plenty of people selling software that will automatically either renew, review, or replace contracts as they come up to expiry. I see that expanding and expanding and expanding. We've already got bids coming in that are written by AI, and at the moment, as an evaluator, I think I can spot them, but whether that will always be the case, I suspect possibly not. Does it matter? Probably not, so long as the information in them remains accurate and descriptive of the bidders.
Are you noticing a trend? Are they better if they're written with AI? Are they or
No, at the moment, no. At the moment, they lack accuracy, finesse, and precision, because we're very often, particularly on some of the things that have been talked about today, social value, for example, we're looking for a very clear statement as to how that bidder will fulfill the requirement. And AI tends to think towards the generic and the non-specific, which isn't particularly appealing.
Richard, did you want to add anything at all on kind of the AI question, on Ian's question, or anything at all, because we're running out? This is probably the last question that we'll take.
Yeah, I'll just add to Rick's point. I think the where procurement fits in AI is really interesting, and I think it will partly be a function of where the use cases in government are and where it is deployed at scale, that will then influence kind of where action is taken. Just to flag that in the government's AI playbook, that the UK government, sorry, has published a number of AI documents in recent months, and the most recent one is the AI playbook, setting out 10 principles for government organisations who are looking to use AI. And principle 8 is you work with commercial colleagues from the start. And it says you should get specific advice from commercial colleagues on the implications of using AI. Reach out to them early in your journey to understand how to use AI in line with commercial requirements. And you should work with commercial colleagues to ensure that expectations around responsible and ethical use of AI are the same between AI systems developed in-house government and those procured from third parties. So there's going to be a lot of that, but I think right now you see governments trying to build the use cases, and once they've done that, and I'm fairly certain they will do that in pretty short order, then it will become a big element of the procurement conversations that governments have, I think.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Rid. I'm looking at the clock. We are spot on time, so I think we do have to leave it there. I just want to say, Lisa, I'm conscious there is one unanswered question left, but Lisa, I just wanted to make sure we covered off other people's questions as well, and maybe we can just follow up with you behind the scenes, because you've come back again on your issue around speaking to people in procurement and some of the barriers to doing that. So we will pick that up with you after the webinar on email, hopefully. I just want to say a huge thank you. Thank you so much to all of you in the audience for sending in so many questions. I think that was probably one of the largest number of questions we have had in one of these conversations. And thank you then so much to Richard and to Rick for your fantastic answers to those questions. And I'm sure, as I said, Rick, if people are interested in doing a deeper dive, they should definitely get in touch with us and maybe follow up some of those links that we said on the training that you can offer. And we can also create bespoke opportunities and training for organisations if they are interested in that. I'd just like to join. We've got lots of people coming in on the chat to say thank you to both of you for a really good event, and I would like to echo that. To everybody who joined today and everybody who registered, we will be sending you, as I said, a link of today's conversation, so you will be able to watch all of this again and to share it with your colleagues. And please do keep an eye out for future webinars. We will be running more in this series of how Whitehall works, which might be of interest to you. But for now, thanks to Rick, thanks to Richard, and I look forward to seeing all of you on another one of our events very soon. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the day. Cheers.